we're ready to kick off. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event today, and to those of you not from Glasgow, to welcome you to our great city. It's been an honour to host delegates, experts and leaders from cities and municipalities across the globe here in Glasgow these past 2 weeks. And it's a pleasure to be joined by so many distinguished guests today. My name is Councillor Angus Miller. I chair Glasgow City Council's Environment, Sustainability and Carbon Reduction Committee, and I am the lead member for the Glasgow Green Deal. Firstly, I want to thank Eurocities for organising this event, but also for establishing the Mayors Alliance for the European Green Deal more broadly. It's a network which I know is providing value to cities across Europe as they work to enact transformative change, the change that is needed in our societies, in our economies, and in our city operations to confront the climate emergency. The people here in this room know more than anybody the crucial role that cities have to play in providing leadership on climate action. And while we all look to world leaders and the international negotiators gathered just a few miles along the River Clyde at the Scottish Events Campus for the action that we need at a global scale, we know that cities are already leading the way and must continue to do so if the world is to be successful in averting climate catastrophe. From participating in discussions over the last 2 weeks, I'm struck that Glasgow is a fitting place to be hosting COP26. Glasgow is a city which has been scarred by the failure of planning for economic transition in the past. The pain of 1970s deindustrialisation weighs heavily on our minds and shows what can happen when we get it wrong. We are wrestling with a legacy of depopulation and generational poverty and inequality, and though we have recovered, we still bear the scars of our heritage of an unjust transition. However, Glasgow has recovered from that transition, a result of culturally led regeneration over the last 40 years, starting with the Glasgow Garden Festival and building on it ever since with the Gallery of Modern Art, and more recently becoming home to a wide range of film, media and television production and companies. Today, Glasgow is a centre of innovation, of business growth and of excellence in higher education. In many ways, that reinvention sets the background for the reinvention that we all need to do over the next decade. Globally, emissions must be cut in half, and in Europe, we must go further still to allow for developing countries with fewer means to move at the same pace and scale. Glasgow has done well in reducing its carbon emissions. We've reduced them by 41% compared to 2006 levels, with a big chunk of that coming from the decarbonisation of electricity. 97% of Scotland's electricity now comes from renewable. But while we have made good progress, so too persist the same stubborn challenges that many other cities across Europe are also experiencing. Renovating our buildings, delivering clean, affordable heat, delivering sustainable mobility, and building resilience to the impacts of climate change. And for all of these, we must mobilise finance and coordinate resources whilst ensuring that action is fair and equitable for all of our citizens. For too long, we thought the climate and ecological crisis can be solved by technology alone. But through the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see how big a change is possible when that technological advance, such as in the forms of vaccines, is paired with research and evidence, social collaboration and economic change too. Getting a winning combination of those working well together can create more change in a day than we've tried for in years. That need is well understood in the European Green Deal, with an emphasis on just transition and the Horizon Europe missions, putting focus on systems innovation in our politics, our culture, our governance and our society. This level of change and the level of innovation needed is an uncomfortable place to be as a politician. To deliver this change as part of this decisive decade, we have to have ambition and innovate together and face the prospect that while some things will be successful, some might fail. Collectively as a cohort of cities, we will deliver the solutions. And so we're fortunate to be able to hear from cities today from all over Europe that are going through that same process and about the experience that they've had in driving forward to net zero. It's a great testament to Eurocities and their power of convening that they've managed to bring this event together. And I, as much as anyone, look forward to hearing the reflections from them and from all our participants today about how we can meet the moment of this decisive decade and deliver a prosperous, net zero and climate resilient future for all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Angus. Hi everybody, my name's Eddie Adams. I am going to be moderating this session today. Great to see you all. It's really nice to be with you in what is my home city. Angus just talked about our history of industrial transitions in this country and in this city, and we haven't always done that terribly well. If you look at the kind of wall friezes here, you can see the shift from the rural to the heavy industrial, and I grew up here in the 70s. And that time was a time of deindustrialization. It's a time of high unemployment. It was a time of economic crisis for the city and social crisis. And I think all of us are here today to make sure that we don't replicate that experience again. We're also here to talk about actions, to talk about what cities are doing on the ground. Because as Angus said, although this week we've had all the negotiations going on amongst the diplomats, the rubber kind of hits the road where cities are involved, and today we're here to hear from first hand what cities are actually doing and what practical things they're doing to help us move to net zero without leaving any person or place behind. Just a wee bit about the format of today's session. So we have got 2 mayors' panels we're going to run on the stage here. The first session will involve Oslo, Zagreb, Lyon and Budapest. Angus is then going to rejoin us on stage to talk a little bit about Glasgow's plans for the local Green Deal here in the city. We're then going to move the furniture around a wee bit. We'll have Utrecht, Marseille, Prague and Bristol then joining us for the second round of discussions and exchanges. And then we have the Deputy Mayor of Paris here instead of Anne Hidalgo to do a bit of a wrap-up and to join some of the dots between the Paris Agreement and what's been happening here in Glasgow this week. And then Annalisa Boni, Secretary General of Eurocities, will close things off. So that's the plan. Ideally, we've got a bit of white space, so we'll hope to bring you into some of these discussions as much as possible. I think we all have to change our behaviours going forward. I think this is clear. That also includes politicians who quite often like to make long speeches. So today we've asked them to keep their interventions short, very focused. So we've got enough room to try and create a bit of space for discussion and exchange. So that's the plan. Can I invite the mayors, the politicians for the first panel to come and join us? So from Oslo, from Zagreb, from Lyon and Budapest, please come up and take the stage. We're going to have an interpreter for our colleague from Lyon. Also, Miranda, do you want to come and join us too? Thanks. Also, the Mayor of Budapest will, I think, make his first intervention in English, then his second intervention in Hungarian. Syrian, please come and join us. Nice to see you. It feels a bit funny, actually. I've been doing this out of my spare bedroom for the last 18 months, as most of us have. It feels kind of almost like a shock. It was a shock when all that started, and now it's just a bigger shock now that it's all kind of hopefully finishing and we're doing something different. One of the jokes I used to make was, you know where the toilets are better than I do, so you actually don't today. If you don't know, the toilets are through there. There are sanitizers all around the room. There is water around the room. We've tried to make it as comfortable as possible in terms of social distancing, so hopefully everybody's comfortable with that. This event is also being live streamed, so and please, if you want to share on your social media channels, the hashtags were there earlier on, hashtag Mayors Alliance, hashtag Eurocities, and delighted to have you all with us. You're all involved in the Mayors Alliance, which is a coalition of 50 politicians, leading politicians across Europe, who are committed to helping us reach the Paris Agreement targets. The format we have now is I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly and tell us one thing which your city is doing to help bring everyone with us, to make sure we're not leaving everyone behind. So a quick round like that, and then we'll go into something a little bit more deeper. Okay? Syrian, do you want to introduce yourself and get us started? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here to this important discussion. My name is Syrian Stav. I'm the Vice Mayor of Transport and Environment in Oslo. People are at the center of the climate issue, and most people are concerned with their daily lives, day-to-day activities. So we have to make it easy for people to be a part of the solution, and we feel that in Oslo people want to be a part of the solution. And our main focus is on where we have the biggest emissions in Oslo, and that's transport, the transport sectors. And so one of the most important things we do is that we invest heavily in public infrastructure and bike lanes. We have road tolls, a toll ring, and all the revenue from that toll ring goes to public transit and to bike infrastructure. And that's also social redistribution, because people with low income are most dependent on public transit, also more dependent on bike lanes, and people that pass the toll ring, they have in general, in average, higher income. So that in itself is redistributing, and also spatial redistribution is also important, that we give people access to the city. So regulating car parking, for example, and giving that space to pedestrians and cyclists is also a redistribution that gives more access to people of all ages, young people that can't drive, and also it's more gender equal, because more females are in general are more dependent on public transit than drive less. So we see all these aspects as a part of the green solution. It's also a health transition and also a social transition.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Siri. We'll come back and hear a bit more detail shortly about exactly what's happening on the ground in Oslo. Welcome to the Mayor of Zagreb, Tomislav Thomashevich. Again, maybe just introduce yourself and tell us one key thing that's happening in Zagreb to make sure people are not being left behind in this transition that we're going through.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Hello to everybody. My name is Tomislav Thomashevich. I'm the mayor of Zagreb. I was elected just less than 6 months ago, and we already started and kicked off last month. We developed and unanimously adopted in the city parliament energy strategy of installing PV solar panels on public buildings, household buildings, and commercial buildings. And we're going to offer these investments also to the citizens, to be co-owners of these solar plants that we put on the roofs, especially of the public buildings. We want to take aboard the people to be co-investors in this. But also, of course, the energy poverty is a major issue in the city of Zagreb, and we are developing a strategy of energy poverty, and we already now have some measures of energy poverty packages for low-income households and energy auditing teams which go to take measures to decrease the energy bills, because we believe strongly that the social justice component of the climate policy and energy transition is very important, because we cannot let those who consume less, who really contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions the least, to be then at the end those who pay proportionally the biggest energy bill of the energy transition that we all have to do.
Absolutely, thank you. Fairness is at the heart of this whole conversation, and I think one of the key things about this discussions in Glasgow has been connecting those two discussions in a way which is really, really vital if we want to bring people with us. Let's move from Croatia to France. Let's move to Bruno Bernard from the city of Lyon. Again, please just introduce yourself and tell us maybe one key thing which your city is focusing on to make sure no one is left behind. And Miranda, you may want to translate first, or no? Okay, c'est bon.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis le président écologiste de la métropole de Lyon, qui regroupe 59 communes et 1 400 000 habitants. Et depuis un an que nous sommes en place, nous essayons de faire la transition écologique avec toujours la justice sociale. C'est par exemple pour les mobilités, multiplier par 2 les investissements dans les transports en commun pour les porter à 2,5 milliards d'euros, avec par exemple 24 km de tramways supplémentaires qui sont faits d'abord dans les quartiers populaires et les banlieues est de l'agglomération. Et ces tramways, ils sont couplés avec une tarification solidaire et qui permet déjà à 50 000 habitants de l'agglomération de ne plus payer les transports en commun. C'est, pour prendre un deuxième exemple, dans notre politique d'isolation des logements que nous finançons, que ce soit le logement social ou le logement privé, nous permettre avec 80 millions d'euros de subventions d'isoler de nombreux logements et de réduire de 40 à 50% la facture énergétique des habitants et donc des plus précaires qui sont ceux qui souffrent le plus de l'augmentation du prix du gaz ou de l'électricité. Et je vais m'arrêter là pour l'instant.
Oui, c'est mieux, merci bien. Miranda, sorry, scribbling furiously. Can you just play back for us there what was being said?
I'd like to introduce to you the president of the Lyon Metropole, who has been in power now for 1 year. The Lyon Metropole has 1,400,000 inhabitants. It is very large, and his municipality has been working very hard to achieve an economic transition with, crucially, social justice. So a first issue they have tackled is mobility. They have invested twice as much in public transport systems. They have invested in a tramway which links the poor areas of the city, particularly those in the east of the city, and they have introduced an element of solidarity, which means that the poorest people, the poorest 50,000 people, do not have to pay for their transport. Second plank of their strategy has been to insulate housing, insulate private housing, and this is going to lead to a reduction of between 40 and 50% in the energy bills of the most vulnerable people, who will no longer have to pay so much for gas and electricity.
Thank you very much. So we heard about mobility, we've heard about housing, we've heard about utilising public buildings with the PV panels and other ways of doing things. So again, we'll dive a bit more deeply into these. I'm going to change the question a little bit for the Mayor of Budapest. So Gergely Karoshany, we've talked a little bit about this tension between the national and the local. And this week we've had the supranational bodies, the national bodies at the table. Cities are really vital to solving these problems we face and capitalizing on the opportunities. Can you tell us a little bit introduce yourself and tell us how Budapest can help catalyze this transition and move things along more quickly?
It's a pleasure for me here in Glasgow today. I was elected as the first Green Mayor of Budapest in 2019. One of my first measure was to declare a climate emergency in the capital. Shortly after, we started organizing citizen assemblies to include the ideas of our citizens into the climate action plan of Budapest. And we have launched a large-scale solar energy integration project where we should use 1,500 megawatts on the city's roof. There is no fight against the climate crisis without cities. The role of cities is especially important in the Central and Eastern Europe region, where the national governments are not doing enough into the climate fight. It seems certain that without the stronger contributions from the Central Eastern Europe, EU decarbonization targets will not be met. EU financial framework, including the Recovery and Resilience Facility, cohesion funds and other MMF channels, need to specify target cities and local communities. This is why, together with my Zagreb 4 mayor colleagues, mayors of Prague, Bratislava and Warsaw, we sent a joint letter for Mr. Alok Sharma and some other institutional leaders, as well as to leaders of the European institutions. In the letter, we underlined our commitment and becoming climate leaders in our countries, calling for more ambitious national determined contributions and stronger financial commitment from the developed countries. We also highlighted the need to adopt measures that are consistent with fundamental democratic and human rights and pave the way the socially just and fair climate transition to ensure that no one is left behind. In this historic moment, we stand ready to accelerate our efforts and to engage with all relevant stakeholders so that together we act for a sustainable future and a habitable planet.
Thank you very much, Mayor Karoshany. And as you said, the Mayor of Prague is also joining us in the second panel. So that's a significant statement from the V4 cities in terms of what they can do to push this agenda forward, and also to ensure that cities are around the table and involved in the investment decisions, which are going to be central to making sure that resources like the European Green Deal go to the right places and are used effectively in the new programming period. So thank you very much for that intervention, and I'm sure the Mayor of Prague will also pick up on those points in the second phase of our discussions. I'm going to ask our politicians a second set of questions, and as they're answering, I'm going to keep an eye on the room. So if you want to jump in and say something, stick your hand up. People from Glasgow are not very tall, so I hope you can see me from this lectern. I'm kind of skewing on the end of the stage here, but I will try and not fall off, and I'll try and keep an eye out for any hands that go up if you want to jump in and raise a question. But let's come around a second time. Let's have a chance to go a little bit more deeply into some of these topics that you've lifted the lid on in that first round interventions. And maybe, Siren, first of all, I'm looking at Oslo. Oslo, I mean, if you're from Scotland, Norway is particularly interesting for us because of the whole fossil fuel history, because of the transition that you're involved in. Like, as you're a small country, you have an urban-rural dimension, so we see many similarities. You touched upon different aspects of social justice. You mentioned the gender dimension, which is really interesting. We've also talked a little bit about the planning issues around public buildings, around how we connect poorer neighbourhoods more effectively. Could you maybe pick up on that theme and talk about how Oslo is revisiting its way they do city planning on the basis of this huge shift that we're going through?
Yeah, so becoming zero emission should be about creating better cities for people, livability, you know, high quality life. And I think also, so that's really important, that climate policies have to also improve health and reduce social inequality, and very often it's overlapping when you see green policies. Either it's transport or redistribution of space that also promote, you know, active mobility. That is also really important for public health, because one of our biggest health crises now is, one is inactivity, and two, what we eat. And those two areas, we also can solve a lot of the climate problem, you know, if we have more healthy food, which is also often green food, you know, more plant-based. We also improve public health. At the same thing we could do with transport. When it comes to urban planning, all departments in the government have to consider the social aspects, not only the financial or environmental, but also the social aspects of their decisions. And we have these open meetings and hearings to make sure that everyone's heard. But often people coming to those meetings are maybe not always the people that we need to reach. So we also have informal ways of doing that. We have actually had speed dating with politicians. You can come and talk about our new area plan and so on. So we work in different ways there. And then we have this Energy and Climate Fund that is where both private persons and businesses, but also a lot of people in low-income families live in cooperatives, and so also cooperatives can apply for funding. It can be for cycle parking, it can be for charging point for EVs. We have, by the way, 70% of our new sold cars in Oslo are EVs. So we're quite ahead there, and now the market is there for second generation EVs, so that's also accessible for people now with lower income. But that should be the second choice, you know. First it should be public transit. So we work in different, you can get support for heat pumps, solar panels, retrofitting windows, you know, that's a hot topic now with the high electricity prices. Bike service in the winter season. So we have a lot of things that are directed at helping people make those choices and also creating a market, for example, for electrical bikes, or also when we work with construction sites. 2 years ago, the world hadn't seen an electrical construction machine. We just started a pilot with the businesses in Oslo, and we scale it up. Now that's the standard in Oslo. And now we have a program in C40 network with global cities across the globe, and they're entering this program, Clean Construction. And now we're demanding that for excavators, lawnmowers, everything should be electrified, you know? So that's a topic ahead now, is working with the grid, getting infrastructure out there. We're also supporting charging points across the city, privately, but also building out publicly charging points. So quite broadly. Okay, so lots going on, and I mean, interesting. You talked about engaging not just the usual suspects, and I know here in Glasgow there's been a citizens' assembly around the climate emergency. We're all looking for different ways to connect, to reframe these conversations, to make sure it's not there's the same people in the room all the time. And we've heard a lot about blah, blah, blah this week, and about how we translate words into action. So these are really important spaces to create in cities, and they're not always that easy. So thanks a lot for that, Sirim. We'll come back and we'll bring you into the conversation later. Let's again jump to Zagreb, and you talked initially about the way that you're mobilizing some of the smart buildings, looking at PV panels, which is a huge city asset in any city. And part of today's conversation is about learning from one another and seeing what's being done in the art of the possible. So, and I think you were also going to, we had a chat earlier, and you mentioned some of the work that's been done around mobility and around public transport in Zagreb. And this is also about psychological shift, as we said, getting people out of cars, getting them onto public transport, using bikes, using their feet. So again, just tell us a little bit about how the Zagreb story is working out, please.
Well, first of all, in terms of public transport in Zagreb, we talk about affordable and decarbonizing transport in general. And in terms of public transport in Zagreb, we subsidize public transport more than 80%, so 80. So to keep the price of the ticket super low. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, public transport is free of charge for a big number of different social groups. So all the people with disabilities, elderly people, socially low-income, vulnerable groups also have public transport free of charge. In terms of our targets for decarbonizing it, we have a target until 2025 to have all the fleet of buses have zero emissions. But on top of that, the big part of public transport in the city of Zagreb are trams, so electric trams. So this is traditional public transport in the city of Zagreb, and we already had a good starting point in terms of electrifying public transport. And we are renewing the fleet of all the electric trams to have them more energy efficient, to have them more comfortable, better quality. Yeah. And then, in the same time, we are expanding the network, physical network of the public trams, stations and routes to enlarge it. So, in the city of Zagreb, I have to say, there's a big challenge in terms of cars. Yeah. We have, unfortunately, we are actually having a trend of growing emissions from the transport sector in the city of Zagreb. So, in terms of housing, we are decreasing, but in terms of transport, we are increasing. City of Zagreb has 800,000 inhabitants, so population of 800,000 people, and yet we have 400,000 vehicles, of which 300,000 are privately owned vehicles. Okay. So that's a lot. It's a big challenge. So we have a trend actually of growing number of cars in the last few decades per capita, and it's a big challenge for us now after these few decades of this kind of transport policy to reverse that completely. And to be honest also, the pandemic didn't help in that. We witnessed a decreasing number of passengers using the public transport, and some of them shifted to cycling and pedestrian transport, but some of them shifted to more cars. Okay. And so this is a major challenge for us to reverse this strategy by combining. We do also a lot of share streets, so we use the streets of, we decrease the speed limit on a number of inner city roads to have them shared for cycling and other uses together with cars. Okay, so that's a big challenge, 800,000 people, 400,000 cars.
That's a big mindset shift, isn't it? Yeah,
almost,
interesting.
so
yeah. But it sounds like you're doing a lot to target
one
that.
vehicle on two inhabitants.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot for sharing that with us, and I think lots of us will identify that challenge of getting people, having stepped backwards during the pandemic, where people feel safer in their little bubble. They want to stay, away from large groups of people. So again, we've got a different kind of job to encourage them to go back to that positive pattern of modality shift. Thanks a lot, Mayor of Zagreb. Siren talked a little bit about food, and you talked about the green issues, and you talked about the your plant-based stuff. Glasgow, of course, is famous for its cuisine, and hopefully you've all had a chance to sample some of it while you've been here this week. Lyon is perhaps even more famous, in fact, for its cuisine. And we talk a lot about food systems, we talk a lot about zero-kilometre food, we talk a lot about shortening supply chains. There is a kind of revolution going on in the food sector, and Lyon really is one of the cities in the vanguard of this. So maybe you'd like to share with us, Bruno, some of the things that are happening in Lyon that perhaps other cities could learn from.
Alors, la question de l'alimentation et de l'agriculture sont essentielles pour nous, à Lyon, mais pour des questions de gastronomie, mais comme en France et en Europe et un peu partout, on a besoin vraiment de changer le modèle agricole et de changer le modèle alimentaire. Et donc, le premier sujet qu'on a, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, sur nos 350 exploitations agricoles sur la métropole de Lyon, 95% de ce qui est produit est exporté. Et on a besoin d'abord que les agriculteurs produisent et soient nourriciers et nous nourrissent, nous, agglomérations, et d'arrêter d'exporter, de faire du maïs pour qu'ils partent à l'autre bout de l'Europe. Donc on a vraiment besoin de cette transformation. On a besoin aussi que nos productions soient compatibles avec les enjeux climatiques et que les productions ne souffrent pas de la canicule, du gel, de la grêle, et donc de les modifier. On a besoin de productions qui consomment moins d'eau. Aujourd'hui, on ne peut plus continuer à en consommer autant d'eau. Et donc ça, c'est un travail important à faire avec les agriculteurs pour transformer. Donc notre première volonté, c'est de préserver les terres et le foncier, d'arrêter l'artificialisation des sols, et deuxièmement, d'aider les producteurs, les agriculteurs à transformer leur culture pour qu'elle soit compatible avec les enjeux d'aujourd'hui. Donc ça passe par des aides aux producteurs pour changer leur modèle de production, par des subventions directes, et puis ça passe par nos politiques de consommation, de cantines, scolaires notamment, pour garantir des achats à ces producteurs et arriver à avoir un modèle beaucoup plus vertueux.
Merci. I'm just looking at your colleague and wondering whether you managed to. How are you doing there? Are you okay to play some of that back for us?
Okay. Well, obviously, food is central to the city of Lyon, and as you've already mentioned, things really have to start to change. There are 350 farmers close to the centre of Lyon, and what they produce is, for the most part, 95% of this is exported. No, they should be producing food for their local area and not producing for export. Also, there are climate dangers that we all know about, whether it is drought, whether it is hailstones, whether it is extreme heat. And we need to have crops which are resistant to this. We need to transform our forms of agriculture so that we can preserve our soils, and therefore what they're doing in the city is to give help by means of grants to farmers to help them change. But that's not all. They also have to change consumption patterns amongst the inhabitants of the city, which is equally important as transforming agriculture itself.
Okay, thank you very much, Bruno. Thanks, Miranda. There was a Glasgow Food Declaration earlier this week. Some of you may have attended the event. So there is this real momentum around this whole space around food, which is super interesting, and in a sense helps us jump some of these departmental silos, which are sometimes an obstacle in terms of us working transversely. So really great to hear what's happening in Lyon, and really inspiring, actually. And so lots of things happening in that space. Another kind of busy area which Glasgow is really looking at is the whole question of energy poverty and the affordability in terms of people being able to, if you're in Southern Europe, keep your houses cool enough in the summertime. If you're in Central or Northern Europe, keep them warm in the wintertime. And, and lots of people worry about the transition to green being about higher bills, more expensive, from the consumer side, and we've already said that affects people on lower incomes more than it does the average. I'd like to finally move to Budapest and maybe ask you around this question of affordability and tackling this question of energy poverty. Maybe tell us a couple of the things that your city is doing, because I know you're doing a lot in this space. Maybe give us a couple of examples of what's useful for us to know. I know that you're going to use, I think you use your interpreter this time, so I'll stop talking, let you do a bit of talking, and then you can give me your answer.
Budapest jelenleg egy negatív spirálban van, amit alapvetően a lakhatási és az energiaszegénységi problémák indítanak el.
Budapest is currently in a negative spiral, which is induced partly by housing issues and the energy poverty issues.
A lakhatási költségek drámaian megnövekedtek Magyarországon és Budapesten az elmúlt években. Az ingatlanárak az egész világon az elmúlt években Budapesten növekedtek a legnagyobb mértékben a nagyvárosok közül.
Housing costs in Hungary in general and in Budapest in particular have increased quite dramatically in the last couple of years. Budapest is the city where housing costs increased the most in the world.
És ezeket a lakhatási problémákat növeli az, hogy Budapesten a lakásállomány rendkívül rossz mutatókat mutat az energiahatékonyság szempontjából, és nagyon sok ember él lakhatási szegénységben.
And this housing crisis is exacerbated by the fact, by the challenges of energy poverty that many struggle with.
Bár az Európai Unió nagyon sok támogatást adott volna Magyarországnak ennek a problémának a leküzdésére, a magyar kormány ezt elterítette ezeket a forrásokat, és más célra használta ezeket, ezért ebben nagyon nagy a lemaradásunk.
And the European Union was ready to lend a helping hand to Budapest and Hungary in that realm, but unfortunately the national government decided to turn that down.
És a negatív spirál azt jelenti, hogy nagyon sokan kiköltöznek Budapestről, csak az elmúlt évben 81 000 budapesti költözött ki az agglomerációba, másfél milliós lakosságú városban, ez egy óriási szám.
And that adds to this negative spiral and pushes a lot of people to move out from the city. Just last year, about 81,000 people left the city, moved outside of the city, which is a big loss for a city of 1.7 million.
Ezek az emberek Budapesten dolgoznak, a gyerekei Budapesten járnak iskolában, és nagyon nagy többségük autóval közlekedik. A Budapesten autóval megtett kilométerek fele az agglomerációból érkezik.
So these people work in Budapest, their kids go to school in Budapest, and they use a car to go to Budapest. So the majority of miles taken within the city boundaries in Budapest are from the agglomeration.
Ez egy óriási nyomás a városon, és ez éppen ezért a lakhatás és a lakhatási szegénység és az energiaszegénység felszámolása az első lépés ennek a negatív spirálnak a megakadályozására, és ez egyszerre fontos klíma szempontból és a szociális igazságosság szempontjából.
And this represents a huge pressure on the city, so to get out of this negative spiral, we're going to have to tackle this problem and stop the exodus.
Klímavédelmi szempontból a legnagyobb beruházás Budapesten, és ezt tartalmazza a klímavédelmi stratégiánk, hogy legalább a lakások egyharmadát 2030-ig energiahatékonyságból meg kell újítani, ez nagyon sok családnak az energiaszegénységből való kilábalását segíteni, és megállítaná ezeknek a lakhatási problémáknak a továbbgyűrűzését.
So from a climate action standpoint, this is the very cornerstone of our strategy to tackle this housing crisis and the energy poverty crisis, and to make sure that by 2030 at least a third of the apartments are from an energy efficiency standpoint renewable.
Ez csak egy példa arra, hogy mennyire fontos, hogy a társadalmi igazságosság és a fenntarthatóság szempontjait mindig közösen kezeljük. Ezek kéz a kézben járnak, és növelik a társadalmi támogatottságot a klímavédelmi célok eléréséhez.
And this is just one example how important it is to link social justice to the climate crisis and climate action.
Ez különösen fontos a mi régiónkban, amely egy olyan régió, amely a az államszocialista, a rendszerváltás előtti évtizedekben egy visszafogott fogyasztással kellett, hogy szembenézzen, és a rendszerváltás után az emberek elkezdték szeretni azt, hogy lehet fogyasztani, lehet autót vásárolni.
And this is a particular problem in a region in Central and Eastern Europe where during socialist times there was severe constraints, or there were severe constraints on consumption. So after the fall of the Iron Curtain, people started to consume, and we are still in this pattern.
Hogyha össze akarjuk kötni, és széles társadalmi támogatottságot akarunk a városokban és az országban szerezni ebben a régióban a zöld átálláshoz, akkor nagyon fontos, hogy ezeket az állampolgári igényeket be tudjuk csatornázni, és hogy kézzelfogható előnyeket is mutassunk az állampolgároknak a klímaadaptáció szempontjából.
So it's not that easy to generate public support for green measures, so that we're going to have to link these issues together in order to be able to mobilize that support.
De ez azt is jelenti, hogy például Budapesten minden évben a legtöbb idős ember a téli időkrízis, tehát a téli nagyon hideg napokban a legtöbb ember budapesti tömblakásokban hal meg, idős emberek, akik nem tudnak fűteni a saját lakásukban.
This leads to tragedies like during the winter time, it's mostly elderly who die in their own apartments because they are not able to afford to heat their apartments properly.
Olyan lakásokban, amiket orosz gázzal fűtünk.
These are apartments that we are heating with Russian gas.
Okay, thanks very much. So a kind of a challenging picture again of depopulation, of specific sections of society being much more vulnerable. About I guess I mean you said it right at the start. It's a bit like our colleague from Zagreb talking about this is not this is not where we'd want to start from, but equally I think where it's difficult to access and mobilize resources and funding. I think that's also a major challenge in as you said earlier on about Budapest situation. I'm going to look both ways now. I'm going to ask you each. I'm going to ask you a question about what your biggest challenge is on the ground, because a lot of the conversation this week, and we've all been talking to lots of people, is the conversations are quite large. They're macro. They're hard for people to get their heads around. And one of the things about cities is cities are about doing things. They're about implementing on the ground. And you've already talked about some of the challenges you face, but it'd be useful to know if you're looking at making tangible progress, things which help bring citizens on side, what are the kinds of things that you are struggling with? What are the kind of things that you are worried about in the next few years to do that successfully? I'll leave our interpreters to translate the essence of that question, and then I'll come round and ask each of you, and I'll look out onto the floor at the same time. If anyone wants to pop their hand up, you want to jump in, there's someone, it would be right at the back, someone right, I can barely see you down there, somebody right at the back. I think we've got a roving mic. Someone could take a mic to the back table there. We'll just get the answer from these questions, and then we'll bring you in. Thanks very much. And if you do jump in and join us, can you just say who you are and where you're from, just so we know, because we've got a mix of people in the room, 50-50 people from Glasgow, locally across Scotland, and also a lot of international people too. So just good to know who's coming in with the questions. Okay, so we're on the way with the microphone, but let's come back to our panel. Maybe ask you first of all, Tomislav. I mean, what's the biggest headache as mayor of Zagreb? And you talked about the importance of bringing people with you. What are the things you worry about in terms of doing that?
I think the finance is one of the challenges. I mean, finance for this transition for public sector, but also for private initiatives as well. In terms of the sectors, for us, I mean, in terms of climate policy, despite transport, it's also the waste management. So the separation of waste, I mean, some of the trends that are already there in the other parts of EU, I mean, are something that we are struggling with in maybe this part of the region where Zagreb is placed. So these are in terms of policies the biggest challenges, and for that you need people. I mean, in terms of waste separation, in terms of this change of transport policy, and for that I think there's going to, of course, I mean, education is part of that, information campaign, but also doing it by yourself. I mean, so actually, the beginning of my mandate was I rode a bicycle to my first day of job, and it became a major news, like how the mayor of Zagreb is riding a bicycle to his job. And then a lot of people said, oh, it's just a PR, you know, it will be on only for a first month, but then after that, forget it, I mean. And, you know, I'm still doing it, I mean, and I want to send a message. This is the normal, you know, this is the behavior that I want to see from the public administration employees. This is the behavior I want to see from business people. This is the behavior I want to see from people going to their jobs. I mean, how to really use public transport more, how to use pedestrian transport more, but also how to use cycling. And for that, our job is to reverse this transport policy and provide infrastructure for this to become easier.
Okay.
And that's a massive, massive systemic change that has to happen.
Okay.
Very quickly, I mean, and that's a major challenge.
Great. So mindset shifts. You talked a bit about the, you know, money going to the right places, role modeling good behaviors, demonstrating different ways of doing things. So all of those are in the frame. Let's maybe go to Budapest. Again, you already talked about some of the challenges very, very clearly and articulately. Anything else, other things you'd want to add? Big challenges as the mayor of Budapest in the short term, in terms of bringing people with you?
A legnagyobb kihívás számunkra a saját kormányunk, a folytatott politikai háború.
For us, the biggest challenge is the political war that we are pursuing.
Sorry, can you say that again, the whole sentence?
The biggest challenge that we are facing is our own national government and the political war that government is waging on us.
És természetesen ezen keresztül a finanszírozási problémák méghozzá két szempontból is. Egyrészt jelenleg Budapest semmilyen Európai Uniós forráshoz nem fér hozzá, mert a magyar kormány blokkolja ezeket.
And of course, the financing problems that induces. On the one hand, we have no access to European funding right now because the national government makes sure that it blocks those funds.
Ezért tartom különösen fontosnak azt a levelet, amiről beszéltem a panel elején, mert azokban a városokban, ahol a kormányok, vagy azokban az országban, ahol a kormányok nem elkötelezettek a klíma küzdelemben, a városok viszont igen, hogyha az Európai Unió nem tud ezeknek a városoknak forrásokat teremteni, akkor nem fogja tudni teljesíteni a klímacélokat.
So that's why I wanted to make sure that I mention the letter that me and my colleagues wrote together to the European Commission, to other leaders, because unless there is a more direct alliance, there is a more direct link between the European level and the city level, cities such as Budapest, who find themselves in an isolated political position, but at the same time are much more willing to do more on the climate action front, will find themselves in a difficult position to proceed.
Okay. A másik finanszírozási problémá pedig a közösségi közlekedés, amit szinte teljes mértékben a város egymaga üzemeltet. Alig van ebben állami támogatás, és ez egy jól működő infrastruktúra. Egy metróvonalon többen utaznak, mint a teljes magyar állami vasutakon, mégis semmilyen állami támogatás ebben a finanszírozásban nincs.
And the other major problem is public transportation. So the Budapest public transportation, by and large, is a well-functioning system, but the city has to finance it almost exclusively. There is barely any state funding or national funding involved, while at the same time, on just one single metro line in Budapest, there are more people traveling on a daily basis than in the entire Hungarian railway system.
Okay, thanks very much. So, you know, there's a big political elephant in this conversation, which is kind of unavoidable and recurring, and will, I'm sure, be part of our second panel discussion. This mindset thing, so it's impossible to shift people onto public transport if the costs are high. And if you look at, we talked about the Zagreb example, if you think of a city like Tallinn, which in 2013 made all of their public transport free, and by 2025 will not only be free, but will also be carbon neutral. So where cities can do that, it's a huge asset in terms of moving people in the right direction, but where they can't, it's a huge barrier. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Let's come to Lille now. Bruno, please again just share with us maybe a short-term challenge. I think we might have to share a microphone as well. Le micro.
Un de nos défis majeurs, c'est de faire diminuer la pollution à la métropole de Lyon, où nous avons beaucoup trop d'habitants qui sont exposés à la pollution. Et donc, c'est de convaincre et de donner les solutions aux habitants pour passer de la voiture individuelle soit au transport collectif, soit au covoiturage, soit au vélo, soit à la marche à pied, mais sur des modes de déplacement qui sont meilleurs pour la qualité de l'air, meilleurs pour la santé et aussi meilleurs pour le partage de l'espace public. On a besoin que l'espace public soit partagé, qu'on puisse aussi le végétaliser. Et dernier enjeu à travers cette thématique de mobilité, c'est le pouvoir d'achat, parce qu'à chaque fois qu'on permet à un foyer de laisser sa voiture et de passer à un autre mode de transport, il économise de l'argent, ce qui est meilleur naturellement pour nos habitants.
Okay, merci. Miranda, could you just give us a...
Okay, well, a major challenge to the City of Lyon is to reduce pollution, which adversely impacts the lives of many
Miranda, use the
of
microphone.
the population. So what they have to do is convince the population that it is better to leave aside the personal car and to use public transport, go by foot, take a bicycle, something that enables them to improve air quality, to improve health, to improve the sharing of public space between people, and also allow for the increased greening of public space. But an added advantage of all that is it increases the purchasing power of families who are no longer expensively funding a car habit.
Thanks very much. Sirin, very briefly from you, if you don't mind, just in terms of what's on your desk, what's in your mind as a challenge around pushing this forward?
Yeah, mentioning national authority is also a challenge for us.
Really?
Not in the same way maybe, but that we don't have enough tools on local level. We need more, because we don't have legislative power on the local level in Oslo, so we need, actually they need to go through all the law regulations and see if we have enough tools, and if it's urban planning, that we can demand, for example, that you use electric machines when you build something in Oslo, for an example.
Yeah.
We're doing that already, but it's unclear if we're allowed to do it. And that kind of regulations, we need national authorities on board with us. Also more funding. The national authorities, they fund highways, motorways across the country, but we don't want that in Oslo. Actually, they're building one without we don't even want it. But that's ideology. But we want the funding for our public transit system, and we want much more of that than widening our roads, creating the problem. So that's also a challenge for us. Toll ring we had it for decades now, but still that's our most important tool to reduce emissions, is to increase the environmental differentiation in a tax, where you have higher tax for fossil fuel cars, vehicles, and lower for electrical.
Yeah.
And we need that to be a much bigger gap between that to increase the acceleration. And also there's a conflict there between, we have a goal of reducing traffic by 30%, but by also stimulating EVs, it's increasing. So that's also a dilemma. Space, you need to reduce traffic for to use the space for pedestrians and cyclists, but still we're also stimulating EVs, and people maybe they have a bit better conscience driving an EV, So there are different challenges, and now, particularly at this time, is the effect of the pandemic. Because we've all been forced to ask people not to use public transit, in contrary to what we've been working on for years. And now we have 80% of the users of public transit compared to what we had in 2019 before the restrictions. So we are now in a also challenging economic situation, because we don't have the revenues then from the tickets to actually fund the transit. Yeah. And we are scared now that if we have to cut the service or reduce it, then it will have a negative spiral.
Absolutely.
And before we actually know what's the new normal. So that's what's most pressing. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a complex mix, and all of this is wrapped together. So the COVID recovery and the shift to net zero, digitization, globalization, all of this is still playing out and it's all mixed together, so we cannot neatly disentangle it. So thanks, Siren, for giving us that insight into your in-tray so we know what's keeping you awake at night. I'm going to ask our colleague who had the question, I'm going to ask you to help me do my job, actually. Could you tell us your question and direct it to one of the panelists? Because I'm just mindful of time and we won't have time to go around everyone, but if you could do that, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, sure. My name's Stuart Graham. I'm here as a representative of Glasgow Trade Union Council. And we've been campaigning for free public transport in this city for over a year. For a lot of the reasons that the speakers have mentioned. Yeah. But I suppose my question to the speakers, I don't know who wants to take this, but is your public transport publicly owned? And if it is not publicly owned, are there plans to shift to this mode of governance in order to help incentivize people out of their cars and give the type of democratic control that will encourage more people to actually use public transport, particularly, what I'm thinking of Glasgow is the buses, because the rail infrastructure is a lot harder to replace. But if we're able to re-regulate, re-municipalise, lower the fares and ultimately make them free, I suppose I'm interested, because nobody's actually mentioned whether it's explicitly publicly owned or not.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great question. Thank you very much. So the question's about ownership of the public transport system. It's about how we can try and tackle some of these fundamental issues around costs if we don't own the infrastructure, particularly around buses, because you said longer term, the railway stuff is much longer to take. Do you want to just jump in there, Tomislav, and tell us, how does it work in Zagreb?
So, thank you for your question. So in Zagreb, the public transport company is 100% owned by the city. And it will stay that way as long as we are in power. So this is for us, of course, political positions, we may disagree with this. But our political position is, and we witnessed this also in waste management, that there is improvement, there's a space for improvement of public companies to be governed better, to reduce even costs, but we see much better control for the transition that we have to do if we have these major strategic companies owned by the city. Okay. And so for us, this is a major political position, and we all actually want to make them better by introducing different democratization and different mechanisms of control, or let's say supervisory role by the public, by the trade unions, by the consumers, by the users, both from business side but also from the citizens, to actually set the benchmarks. How do we evaluate if these city companies are running good or not? Okay. Because they're not, there to make profit. They're there to make some kind of objective. And we want to take society on board to set these objectives: social, environmental, economic, of course, sustainability, etc. And then evaluate the managing boards running these city companies according to these benchmarks.
Thank you very much.
For us, this is a major kind of political position.
I'm slightly worried about time, but let's get one more perspective. Siren, you were waving your finger. Do you want to come in and just say, how does it work in Oslo? Who owns the transport infrastructure? What's the setup?
In Oslo, it's a publicly owned company that we own together with our neighboring region, because what we needed is a structure that's cross-regional and to create products that are and tickets that are easy, zoning that is easy to understand and use for the people, and also, so we are funding it from the municipality of Oslo and also our neighboring region, Viken, and also the toll ring we are owning. We have a toll rings that we have to agree with our neighbor region how to what the taxes are to be, and of course that's a debate because they want lower and we want higher. But that goes also into funding the public transit. So it's a company, but it's owned by, so we are owning it and controlling it. Okay. And I don't agree with free public transit, and that I work for lowering the cost or the tickets. I want cheap public transit. But if you have completely free public transit, that is also in competition with biking and walking. And I think walking and biking should always be the preferable mode of transport. That's active mobility, healthy mobility. So I think it should be really low, and maybe you could have also for some groups, for free. But in general, I think cheap is good. Free, the science there is not always saying that that's the best option.
Okay, cheap is good. Thank you very much. I'm going to draw a line under the conversation there, because otherwise we're going to really run out of time. Big thank you to all of our panelists for that first intervention. So we're going to rearrange the furniture. I'm going to ask our guests to go and de-microphone themselves. I'll ask our second round of mayors to go that way and get your microphones. In the meantime, I think Angus is going to rejoin us. Where's Angus gone? On stage, and tell us a little bit about the Green Deal in Glasgow, so we know what the plans are to localise the Green Deal messages. Angus, where are you? There you are. Okay, brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic to hear from city leaders in that panel session there from across Europe about their work and ambitions to transform their cities for a climate conscious and climate resilient age. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity this afternoon just to share with you a little bit about the work that we're doing here in Glasgow to develop our own Green Deal. Could I get the next slide, please? Thanks very much. Glasgow's Green Deal is a 9-year mission to transform the city and wider city region's economy to tackle the climate and ecological emergencies whilst tackling poverty and delivering justice and equity. The development of the Green Deal was included as a key commitment in our city's climate plan alongside 58 other actions in that climate plan, setting out some of the actions that are already in train and that our partners are working to deliver with a view to becoming a net zero carbon city by 2030. The Green Deal itself is not a new plan or a new strategy in and of itself, but a system change initiative to increase the pace and scale of decarbonising and building resilience to climate change, to bridge the gap between ambition and implementation. The emerging detail is set out in our Green Deal roadmap, but in a sense it's an organising principle, an umbrella approach to delivering our existing policy commitments under a common mission of net zero climate resilient living by 2030. It will consist of investments, initiatives, innovation, policies and plans to transform the city and wider city region. Throughout the Green Deal, we are placing a strong emphasis on co-design and co-production because we recognise that such a big change can only be done with people, not to them. And because if we want a just transition, then those people who will be most affected need to be helping to make the decisions about what we do, what the priorities are and what we fund. And although we have a draft roadmap, you can see that commitment even at an early stage, and crucial will be our call for ideas, which we're launching today, and there's some details later about how people can get involved with that, and that will help shape the Green Deal with the city and its citizens. Could I get the next slide, please? Thanks very much. We've set a number of broad principles which will help guide and steer our work as we develop the Glasgow Green Deal. I won't go through these in too much detail, but we want to be collaborative, working towards shared goals and outcomes. We want to be Paris-aligned in our ambition. We want to be equitable, making decisions based on the needs of current and future generations equally, with a focus on those most at risk of net zero transition and the impacts of climate change. We want to be inclusive, ensuring significant involvement from our citizens from inception, and evidence-based, using the best research, knowledge and information to make decisions. And as an early part of the Green Deal, we developed a draft roadmap which was taken to Council Committee only a few weeks ago, which is a direction of where we intend to go in the next couple of years to create a pipeline of investable projects and programmes at scale to reshape existing activity under this umbrella. Could I get the next slide, please? The Glasgow Green Deal is built around achieving a mission of equitable net zero carbon and climate resilient living by 2030, but it acknowledges that this can only happen by achieving 3 interlinked objectives related to addressing poverty and justice, decarbonisation and adaptation, and prosperity, jobs and high quality places. There's a recognition that the city needs to guide and enable this activity to make it happen. And as part of the Green Deal, we've identified 8 areas of focus for action where progress is underway, but transformational and exponential change is needed. And you can see some of those in the pink boxes there. These cover both mitigation and adaptation. And each area of focus is a series of complex adaptive systems at different stages of maturity where increased innovation or intervention is needed to scale and accelerate progress. Could I get the next slide, please? So what baseline are we starting from? The Glasgow Green Deal builds on significant amounts of work through our climate plan to tackle the climate emergency in a fair and equitable way. And this slide just highlights some of the many opportunities, some of the many projects that are already underway in the city. Already we've established, for example, the Glasgow Glasgow Recycling and Renewable Energy Centre, which is a partnership between Glasgow City Council and Viridor, opened in 2019, which generated 20,000 megawatt hours of renewable energy in its first year of operation, which is roughly equivalent to the power of 3.4 standard onshore wind turbines, saving 90,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. Glasgow's Circular Economy Route Map, which outlines our approach to shifting the economy away from limitless consumption and one where reuse of materials is a guiding principle, has been developed in partnership with key stakeholders such as the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. The Glasgow Pantries programme, for example, has been a great success in avoiding food waste and supporting communities to avoid food insecurity. Our active travel strategy, a new £400 million, 270-kilometre network of cycleways and footways, will provide clean, healthy mobility through a comprehensive approach to walking, wheeling and cycling, while our desire to rebalance the city's streets away from private vehicles and towards people is underpinning our planning for the city centre with the Transformative Avenues programme of public realm investment, which is taking place over the next few years. And through Climate Ready Clyde, which is our regional partnership with 14 other partners to implement incremental and transformational adaptation, we are using systems change approaches and focusing on just transition. So these are just some of the types of initiatives that we must pursue, but we know they must come forward more quickly in higher numbers and scaled up for transformational change. Next slide, please. Although we're still getting our strategic approach underway, we have a number of really exciting actions that are underway already, which exemplify the kind of ambitious thinking that we will require to take forward as part of our areas of focus. With our Green Deal focus on infrastructure, for example, we must prioritise the development of a regional EV charging network, building on the existing rollout in the city by creating a comprehensive network across Glasgow and surrounding local authority areas. But we know too that a shift from private cars running on petrol and diesel to slightly less carbon-intensive electric vehicles will simply not be enough. We need a transformational modal shift towards accessible, clean and green public transport, fundamentally changing the way that we get about the city. Back in 2018, Glasgow's Connectivity Commission, established by the Council, proposed the development of a Glasgow metro system, a new network of sustainable, low-carbon transport to overhaul and fill in the gaps in regional transport connectivity, connecting underserved communities and linking people to jobs, services and to each other. And working with the Scottish Government, this is now an idea that's firmly on the national agenda as a serious investment proposition for the coming decades. As well as decarbonising transport, we know a central focus will be on decarbonising home energy. Glasgow's housing stock is predominantly older, running on gas and non-energy efficient, and home energy retrofit will be a central priority of climate action in the city. We'll pursue an emerging programme of work to improve the sustainability of around 400,000 homes in Glasgow and the wider city region to an EPC rating of C or above over the next decade, including a focus on the hardest to treat homes and those in fuel poverty whilst creating local jobs. Speaking of jobs, we are building on existing relationships with the city's skills and education sectors to create a Just Transition Skills Action Plan, identifying the changes that will be needed in the skills system and in project development approaches to ensure the city supports our workforce to access the opportunities of the transition to net zero climate resilient economy and to support those at risk to retrain. And of course, as much as we will strive to reduce our carbon emissions, our Green Deal includes a focus on tackling residual emissions, creating opportunities for sequestration and promoting nature and biodiversity. We're supporting plans for the Clyde Climate Forest, which will see 18 million trees planted across the Glasgow city region to increase carbon storage, expand canopy cover to protect the most vulnerable from heat and to support habitat connectivity. Next slide, please. So foremost, this will be a programme of transformation co-designed with the people of Glasgow, ensuring we have a detailed pathway to net zero and climate resilience, which is both technically robust, but which also reflects the needs and desires of businesses and citizens too. In doing so, we'll build on the experience of our COP26 Climate Citizens Assembly, a deliberative process with 50 representatives from the city, which focused on the legacy of COP26 for Glasgow and the transition to net zero. We've started as we mean to go on with a collaborative approach that puts citizens at its heart. Through our innovation, market making and skills strands of work, we will seek to create the new solutions needed for transformative net zero and climate resilience, while our work on financing the Green Deal focuses on ensuring we can mobilise the funds required to make it happen. And in the background, we'll be folding in and scaling up delivery of existing work happening across the city. So we should see that pipeline of projects and investments emerging from this work, supported by the wider enabling conditions. Next slide, please. So through the Glasgow Green Deal, we've committed to align the city's financial flows with the Paris Agreement so that we can implement the agreement in full at a local level, mitigation, adaptation and finance. We know that delivering the Glasgow Green Deal will require a large amount of investment, both from the city but also from national governments and from the private sector. The assessment of finance needs for existing city plans and strategies sits at around £30 billion. We're planning to develop a detailed resource mobilisation plan to identify and prioritise the range of funding and finance sources needed for the Glasgow Green Deal. But in the interim, we're implementing a high-level strategy which focuses on public grants for public goods, so focusing on targeting the use of public money towards those activities which have diffuse benefits or cannot attract private investment, for example, flood defences. Adopting an investment mindset, so using public finance to de-risk projects and leverage in private finance or blend finance. And innovation for new finance approaches, developing new business and financial models for mitigation and adaptation. These need to be key focuses for the city over the next few years. Next slide, please. And one of the new and innovative approaches we are trying to steward investment in this way is the Glasgow Green Print for Investment. The Green Print is a portfolio of £30 billion worth of public and private city projects at various stages of development, including some I've outlined previously, such as the Glasgow Metro and others that I've not had time to mention, like a new district heating scheme for the city. The Green Print seeks to support both greening finance and financing green by bridging the gap between private finance and city investment and creating a virtuous race to the top for sustainability investment. Going forward, the city will set criteria for inclusion to improve the quality of local business cases, requiring project proposers to have the robust evidence of sustainability benefits aligned to environmental, social and governance requirements. Next slide, please. And finally, we know there are significant benefits to be had from delivering a Green Deal locally such as this. We know that £1 spent in climate mitigation and adaptation activity might well be worth up to £10 for the city economy, a no-brainer for investment which itself is dwarfed by the cost of inaction. But I briefly want to share these slides here, which show estimates of the kinds of job creation that we can expect to see as well. It's taken from a different set of modelling, but it assumes, which assumes a lower level of investment than those that we recognise as necessary. But it shows that we can create up to 14,500 jobs from investing in net zero alone within the city. And that climate action and economic prosperity can go hand in hand. And clearly this is one of the central messages that we as city representatives must be promoting as we embark on the monumental transition that we need to undertake to get to net zero. Next slide, please. So can I just thank everybody for their time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure sharing with you some of the work and issues that we're grappling with here in Glasgow, and I'm certain that these will be similar challenges that are being addressed by many cities represented here today. It's incumbent on all of us as cities to show leadership and forge the way forward, but we can also draw on the knowledge and experience that comes from this being a common endeavour to us all. And as I say, today we've launched the call for ideas for the Glasgow Green Deal. We're looking for people across the city and beyond to input into that collaborative process of co-design. But we also too want to work with cities from around Europe and around the world as we all seek to drive this change forward together. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Angus, for helping us understand what's happening in Glasgow. It's amazing things. I mean, the forest idea is really eye-catching. the job stuff we could talk about for a long, long time. So one of the great things about the Mayor's Alliance is it brings together, as Eurocities does, this space to discuss and to learn from one another. So if you've heard things today you want to follow up, then Eurocities is a good space to start in terms of looking at the working groups, and which brings together all these conversations. So we're going to reset the button now. I'm going to invite our second set of mayors and politicians. Please come and join me on the podium. So I think we need to have, because of the mics and the links, we need to have Utrecht nearest to the lectern. So if you want to come and sit here, Sharon. If we want to have Michel, second here, or from Marseille, nice to see you. We'll then have, we need to do a little swap. You need to sit beside the Mayor of Prague. We'll move down there. And good to see Marvin, the Mayor of Bristol. If you want to sit there, that'd be fantastic. So you can see on the screen who we have with us. As I bump into the furniture, I'll just put myself over here. So again, a great selection of cities, and big applause to Eurocities for bringing together such a fantastic, high-caliber group of cities and speakers who are going to share their stories with us. We'll do this similar but different. The similar thing is I'm going to ask them all one question, the same question as they introduce themselves, to give us a big chapeau overview of the answer, and then we'll go into the details of each city story in a little bit more deeply. So that's the idea. Let's start with Utrecht. Let's ask Sharon Dijksma from Utrecht, the deputy mayor, the mayor of Utrecht.
Mayor.
Yeah, the mayor, not the deputy mayor. I saw your great video earlier this week, the one with you talking about the transition in the city is fantastic. Could you introduce yourselves and tell us a little, well, in the earlier conversation, we heard from Oslo, lots of people driving electric vehicles, and I guess one of the risks is that we have a kind of a Tesla transition, that for middle-class people who can afford this stuff, who can pay their bills, this is going to be a much easier journey than people who are more deprived, who haven't got that kind of money. So again, just tell us something Utrecht is doing to make sure people are not being left behind. It's not a luxury experience, as it were.
Yes, well, thank you very much. My name is Sharon Dijksma. I'm the mayor of Utrecht. Utrecht is the fourth largest city in the Netherlands, approximately 360,000 inhabitants, and the fastest growing city in the Netherlands. So I think that we will hit the 400,000 very soon. Previously, I also have been a minister for the environment, and in that position I was able, on behalf of the EU, to negotiate about the Paris Agreement. And obviously, I think that especially as a mayor, I have a lot of responsibility to bring Paris home, so to say, and to make sure that our city really follows up the standards. And that is not easy, as all of you know. And I would like to just shortly say something on the social issue, what you mentioned. This whole thing is not going to succeed if we are not able to bring in our citizens and to have their support. And therefore, I think that the Paris Agreement should also be having a social agenda. And especially those people who are poor and not have all that privileges, the not Tesla generation. Yeah. Actually, they should benefit from all the change in technology, in prosperity at first. So if we would be able to do that, I think that Paris would gain a lot more public support than it has now. And we're not there yet. One issue in my city, which is very important, is we are biker city #1. Sorry, Copenhagen. Also, sorry, Amsterdam. We have recently built a parking lot for a garage for bikes under the central station for 12,500 bikes. And we try to get all our people in the city on the bike. Because we think that eventually that is for your health, for the environment, for the city, because we do not have that much public space, the best. And what we try to do is, for instance, children who have parents who cannot afford bikes, to help them out. A small
a nice introduction. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll come back and have another bit of the discussion in a minute, Sharon. Let's move to Marseille. Michel, thank you very much for joining us. Again, same question to you. Please introduce yourself and maybe tell us one thing which Marseille is doing to make sure that the most deprived people are not kept apart from this important change that we're going through. Just talk amongst yourselves.
Bonjour, excusez-moi, je comprends pas, pas très bien, donc c'est un peu plus long. Non, merci de nous avoir invités. Bon, je suis Michel Rubirola, j'ai été maire de Marseille pendant quelques temps. Bon, quelques soucis m'ont fait que je suis passée première adjointe en charge donc du programme et en charge de la santé publique et des relations internationales. Le printemps marseillais, dont j'ai conduit la liste, s'est engagé pour une ville plus verte, plus juste et plus démocratique. Et c'est d'ailleurs pour ça que nous avons nommé un adjoint spécifique à la transition écologique, qui est M. Sébastien Barle, qui est ici présent, et un adjoint à la démocratie participative. Parce que pour nous, il était important que les citoyennes et les citoyens de Marseille soient associés à la transition écologique. Je pense que vous avez entendu parler de Marseille. Marseille, c'est une ville fracturée. Marseille, c'est une ville très pauvre. On a le plus pauvre quartier européen dans le 3e arrondissement de Marseille. Et dans une ville qui est brisée socialement, il est très difficile de mettre en place une transition écologique qui est souvent perçue pour quelque chose qui doit se mettre en place une fois qu'on a résolu tous les problèmes sociaux. Marseille aussi est très en retard dans la transition écologique. C'est la ville la plus polluée de France, c'est la ville la plus embouteillée de France. C'est un palmarès dont on se passerait. C'est une ville qui est fracturée, c'est-à-dire que les transports en commun s'arrêtent à la limite des quartiers les plus pauvres, ce qu'on appelle les quartiers nord. Donc nous, notre mission, c'est de recoudre cette ville qui a été brisée et abandonnée pour une partie de sa population. Donc c'est pourquoi, pour associer l'ensemble de la population marseillaise, on a tenté de créer pour chaque projet une gouvernance et une co-construction avec les Marseillaises et les Marseillais, avec la population, pour que les habitants se sentent concernés par ce projet. Notamment, on est en train de travailler sur un projet en co-construction avec des acteurs économiques, des acteurs sociaux et des acteurs scientifiques et associatifs qui s'appelle la Cité de la Transition et qui a pour but donc de rassembler 500 acteurs locaux afin de créer des filières de formation pour les jeunes, justement les jeunes de ces quartiers, et créer cette filière verte. Cette filière verte qui tournera autour de l'économie du lien, du partage, de la circularité et qui sera un partenariat entre le public et le privé. Et le deuxième grand projet aussi qui est en place, c'est la création de l'Assemblée citoyenne du futur qui a pour but justement de rassembler des citoyens. On est en train de réfléchir sur le mode de constituer cette assemblée. Est-ce que ça va être du tirage au sort pour que toute la population soit représentée? Bien sûr, il y a la liste électorale, mais il y a énormément de personnes qui ne sont pas inscrites sur les listes électorales et qui risqueraient aussi de marginaliser ces populations. Donc l'Assemblée citoyenne du futur aura en charge d'intégrer les contributions citoyennes dans l'établissement des politiques publiques. Voilà, donc c'est ce qui est important pour nous. On se sert un petit peu de l'expérience française de la Convention citoyenne qui a montré que la parole des habitants n'avait rien à envier à la parole des scientifiques parce que c'était une parole qui reposait sur le bon sens et sur le vécu. Merci Michel. J'ai voulu dire que c'est mieux de poser parce que Miranda, so Miranda, you're smoke coming off the page there, so you're writing. You probably had no time to process that. So if you can maybe just try and, I'm sure lots of us picked up some of the headlines, but just play that back for us, please.
Yes, let me introduce the.
Do you have a microphone? You want to give you a microphone so people at the back can hear you? Yeah, great stuff.
Introduce Michel Rubirola, who is the first Deputy Mayor of Marseille. She was initially elected as mayor, but due to personal issues, stood down from that position to occupy the position of health and foreign affairs. She represents a French Green Party, and therefore she is working hard towards a green transition that involves the population of her city, because it is essential to have public buy-in if anything is going to happen. It is one of the poorest cities of France, and its 13th arrondissement is very poor indeed. There is a breakdown in the social fabric, and therefore this makes all talk of transition extremely difficult to navigate because of these very severe social problems. It is a city that is very behind when it comes to transition towards green. And they have to do something. They have to be able to find a means to work with the population to get public buy-in. So they have set up a project called Transition City, and they have got a number of stakeholders, co-constructors, economic agents, people from the social sector, scientists, group community associations. And what they want to do is to train young people from these poorer areas and give them jobs within a green economy. They want to create links between sharing and a circular economy, and links also between public and private sector involvement. So they've also set up a citizens' assembly, and they're thinking about how to recruit people to the assembly, because very often the most vulnerable people are not on the electoral rolls, so that's perhaps not the best way to recruit them. So this is something that is currently under discussion, but certainly it has been shown at national level, there's a French National Assembly, that the voices of people who are working on the ground, who have lived experience of the issues, have as much, if not more, to contribute than the scientists who are researching into the problems.
Okay. Many thanks, Michelle. Thanks for introducing the concept of circularity to the conversation. Also picking up on Angus's points earlier on about the importance of employment, creating opportunities as we have this new green labour market. And also, like Glasgow, the Citizens' Assembly trying to involve citizens actively in the dialogue, which, as we know, is really, really important. Let's move to Prague. Let's move to Zdeněk Ryb. We've already heard that you're one of the signatories of the V4 declaration. And we're talking here about the most vulnerable, how we make sure that everyone is coming with us. Can you maybe just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also maybe a headline thing which Prague is doing around this agenda, please? Good to see you.
Sure, thank you very much, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure for me. I have been a mayor of Prague since 2018, and I represent the Pirate Party. And Prague is an open-minded, liberal and forward-thinking city, and we strongly promote democracy, freedom and human rights. And the commitment to these values also mean a moral obligation for us to the immediate climate action. And Prague is definitely committed and prepared. So if you would ask me about how to make sure to involve everyone in the green transition, a few months ago, I would definitely mention one of our projects, which is 1 million trees for Prague in 8 years. We had already 3 years of this project running, and we have planted 400,000 trees. Some of them is being planted with the citizens who would like to plant with us on a public planting event. So that is one of the possible ways how anyone could join this adaptation project. But if you're asking me today, I have an opportunity to proudly announce that we have also started another project of Prague, which is the Prague Energy Community, which basically means that we would like to have by 2030 a solar energy plant on a roof of 20,000 buildings in Prague. And as the buildings in Prague, I mean the residential buildings, for example, residential apartment buildings are owned usually by the people who live in them in Prague. That is maybe a sort of specific of Prague, but this actually allows all the people, almost all the people who are ready and willing to take their part in this thing, to actually participate on this project. And this is the way how we are trying to get the people involved in this, to get their hands on it, to touch it in person.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, and we know that making it real is a really important part of this shift we're involved in doing, and we talked a lot about mindset. Yeah, come back in.
Maybe one more thing, I would like to use this opportunity to thank my deputy mayor, Petr Hlubuček, who is sitting over there. Please, Peter, can you raise your hand? Yeah, that's the guy who is in charge of the green transition in Prague.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much. Last but not least, let's go to Bristol. Marvin Rees, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Bristol, I think, is the only other UK city apart from Glasgow who have signed up to the Mayor's Alliance, so you are in the forefront of this conversation, very active with a European profile. Again, maybe just introduce yourself to the audience and give us a couple of headlines from what Bristol is doing just to make sure that this sort of transition is not something which is only affordable for middle-class people in our cities.
Yeah, so Bristol, city of 460,000 people. It's one of the UK core cities, 10 biggest cities outside of London. I'll say a couple of key areas. One is we were European Green Capital in 2015. To be perfectly frank, European Green Capital in Bristol was a very white middle-class celebration. It didn't include working-class housing estates, white working-class housing estates. It certainly didn't include black and Asian people, and it didn't include migrant communities who are already climate-driven migrants. That's not okay. So the environmental movement itself needs to have a little bit of humility and self-awareness and recognize that it has replicated the social hierarchies it claims to be fighting against too often. So we set up off the back of that something called Black and Green Ambassadors, which was an intentional effort to recruit people from our black communities or Asian communities to be ambassadors for the environmental movement. I would say, and let me be frank about it, we've got to look at our own makeup in the room here for European political leaders. This extends into political leadership in general. Inclusion cannot be a side project. It has to be that our political leadership actually reflects the full diversity of our cities. And most of our cities will say we are global. And therefore we have to be intentional about recruiting our political leadership from those global populations. So we had an event just a couple of weeks ago where we pulled the whole city together to talk about our future. One of our key speakers on climate was from Ethiopia and was a climate-driven migrant, for all intents and purposes, talking about climate change, alongside people in corduroy trousers and all the rest of it. So those are the kind of the two things I'd really pushing on. The other thing that we do to make sure that our climate change is inclusive is making sure that we're tackling the fundamentals, like child hunger. 1 in 5 kids in the city at risk of hunger. Yeah. Chukwamuna said last night, people are not going to be thinking about existential threats 30 years away if they're worrying how they're going to feed their family over the next 30 days. Yeah. So tackling hunger, tackling housing insecurity, making sure that people have got good quality jobs, these are all critical to climate change if we're going to keep our populations with us and avoid, which I think is a very real risk, is a political backlash if decarbonisation comes at the cost of jobs and economic security of our populations. We'll lose the dressing room, and that'll be a major political problem, and probably sow the seeds for political extremism. Yeah, thanks a lot, Marvin. I mean, that political backlash from Gilets jaunes through to some of the stuff we see at the moment, that's a real live issue, obviously. Yeah, and thanks also for your
for reflecting on the Bristol European Green Capital experience and what you've learned from that as a city, and practical example of what you've done to widen things. So we have, your Black Green Ambassadors is a fantastic initiative, and it's not the only one happening in Bristol, obviously, at the moment. So I'll come back to you, talk about the kind of the pandemic dimension and the post-COVID dimension, because that's the other thing which is in play strongly and is an undercurrent of these conversations, but hasn't really come through so much so far. I mean, let's maybe Sharon on the health stuff, because I know that Utrecht has looked a lot at. You talked about earlier about mobility. This sort of trial between mobility, health, and the environment is something you've really tried to push in Utrecht. And we know that we've got departmental silos which sometimes stop us working across these boundaries. So maybe say a bit more about how Utrecht is doing this and what kinds of things you can share with other cities.
Yes, although I heard some really great examples also from the colleagues, I have to say. I think that we need an integrated approach here, because health is now at the heart of the agenda, and even COVID is polarizing our societies. I mean, I do not know how it is with you, but we have these great discussions between people who are vaccinated and those who won't. And what you see is that it's more or less the same discussion that we have within the climate debate. And as mayors, we need to overcome this polarization and see how we can bring people together. So therefore it is really necessary that we in our agendas put those people who are the most vulnerable on the top of the agenda. And for instance, air pollution is a silent killer. It kills people and it gives them most of the times maybe 2, 3, 4 or 5 years less living than another person who is not living in a polluted area. But nobody knows. So what we try to do is to organize lifestyle, the awareness of what pollution really does with you and your future, and the way that we organize our eco-structure in once. So this is why, for instance, we promote walking and biking so much, because we really think that if you talk about transport, everybody's talking about cars. But actually that is not that interesting for us. Yes, if there are cars in our city, we want to be zero emission. But we prefer people to be able to walk or to be able to take the bike. So this is why we have this concept of the 10 minutes. So in Utrecht, our game is to be able to be from one place in the other within 10 minutes, either walk or taking a bike, or sometimes you need to take an electric bike because we're a big city. And that approach means that the whole thing is built around it. So we're building biking infrastructure, which means that cars are guests and pedestrians and cyclists are the kings in our roads. We move parking plots from out of the city, and instead of that we rebuild places for children to play. We put extra green in the public space. We use it for public transport, which is expanding. So we have a whole integrated approach, and I think that when you bring in health, you also get new ambassadors for your agenda, because I also agree that we need to find new advocates in order to bring this agenda a step ahead. And I think the health issue is important. I didn't mention noise, but that is also something which highly affects people, their lives. And if you use cars and move not a lot, then you're not so healthy. So also for that agenda, it is important to have this approach. And yeah, this is how we organize it. And if you come and visit Utrecht, and then I'll stop, then you will see a new phenomena. We have also traffic jams. I stand in them many mornings on my bike. Then I have a whole line of people waiting, and it is really crowded with all those people on the bike, and then there are only buses and almost no cars. Yeah. So this is how the future looks like, I suppose.
Fantastic. And a lot of us are very jealous of you describing that scenario because it seems such a far away from where we are just now in most of our cities. Thanks for introducing the 10-minute city concept. I think Paris works around Carlos Moreno's 15-city concept. We've got the Kate Rayworth donut economy paradigm in the mix. So all of us looking for new ways to land this, to operationalize some of these new opportunities that we see around us, because there are opportunities. It's a challenge, but there are also big spaces for us to improve things and to do better. Maybe just picking up on your point about air quality and thinking about air quality in a city like Marseille. And we've talked about people in deprived neighborhoods are more exposed to things like air quality, to worse environmental conditions. Maybe just share with us, Michel, a little bit about what Marseille is doing to tackle this air quality issue in poorer neighborhoods. I'll leave Miranda a second or two just to explain. Because my French isn't good enough to do it.
D'accord. Ce que fait Marseille, ce que va essayer de faire Marseille pour s'attaquer à la qualité de l'air dans les quartiers défavorisés, il faut savoir que ces quartiers, je le dis, mais c'est très important, la puissance publique a été défaillante depuis très longtemps. Et la meilleure qualité environnementale passe par le cadre de vie. C'est un cadre de vie qui est très dégradé là-bas et où il cumule toutes les difficultés, c'est-à-dire chômage, moins bonne santé, habitat dégradé, maladies plus élevées. Et en fait, ces inégalités sociales viennent quand même d'une histoire, on va dire, portuaire, puisque avec la désindustrialisation, cette activité portuaire s'est transformée en une activité de croisiériste qui augmente la pollution dans les quartiers les plus défavorisés. On assiste à un afflux de bateaux de croisiéristes qui restent branchés en permanence parce que très peu de quais sont électrifiés. Et dans ces quartiers là-bas, il n'y a pas du tout d'électrification des quais. Les navires arrivent avec un fuel polluant. Donc il y a beaucoup de choses à faire là-dessus, mais qui ne dépendent pas de la ville de Marseille, puisqu'il faudrait qu'on fasse une zone ECA en Méditerranée pour justement mettre des contraintes à tous ces bateaux qui arrivent dans le port de Marseille. Donc nous, on travaille, et puis aussi ces quartiers sont enclavés et manquent de transport en commun. Donc les gens se déplacent en voiture. Pollution de voiture, plus pollution maritime. Nous, malheureusement, on n'a pas les compétences puisque ça dépend de la métropole, l'aménagement des transports en commun. Nous avons une aide de l'État qui va arriver et ce que nous voulons faire, c'est faire arriver les tramways dans ces quartiers. Il y a des projets dont de désenclavement de ce quartier par les tramways. Mais il y a quand même cette pollution marine pour laquelle nous devons travailler. Marseille s'est inscrit dans le projet des 100 villes décarbonées et on a rendez-vous justement avec le grand port maritime pour savoir comment on peut inscrire le grand port dans cette décarbonation de la ville de Marseille. Ensuite, ce qu'on peut faire, nous, la ville de Marseille, c'est qu'on a quelque chose d'extraordinaire, c'est la mer, c'est la biodiversité, c'est la mer. Et les gens de ces quartiers nord n'ont pas accès non plus à la mer, puisque c'est le seul endroit. Et les gens des quartiers sud ont des plages. Dans les quartiers nord, il y a une seule plage qui est au bout de la ville de Marseille. Et aussi, il y a un manque de transport en commun. Donc nous, ce qu'on veut, c'est que tous les enfants des quartiers, des cités, puissent descendre à la mer pour profiter de cette biodiversité marine et de prendre conscience de l'importance de cette biodiversité. Vous savez que les petits Marseillais de ces quartiers, la majorité ne savent pas nager. Certains ne connaissaient pas la mer. Donc il y a eu des programmes l'été qui font qu'il y a des navettes qui vont chercher les enfants dans les cités pour les faire descendre à la mer. Mais il ne faut pas que ce soit des programmes qui durent qu'un mois ou deux. Il faut qu'en permanence, les personnes puissent aller, les enfants puissent aller à la mer. Donc nous, qu'est-ce qu'on fait, ville de Marseille? C'est que ça passe aussi par d'autres politiques publiques qui mettent l'environnement au centre. C'est-à-dire que dans les nouvelles habitations, il y aura des espaces verts qui seront installés. Il y aura là, au niveau des écoles, c'est la réhabilitation des écoles avec la désimperméabilisation des cours et des et des cours arborés à l'intérieur de ces écoles. Nous allons apprendre à nager aux petits Marseillaises et Marseillais. C'est un grand plan ambitieux que nous avons et ça passera aussi par ça. C'est que l'environnement, l'écologie, c'est pas simplement la nature et des jardins, mais ça s'intègre dans toutes les politiques publiques, avec la sanctuarisation des terres agricoles qui restent aussi dans ces quartiers, puis il y a des terrains vagues pour pouvoir faire de l'agriculture urbaine de proximité, des jardins partagés.
Merci bien. How are we doing, Miranda?
We're doing
Okay. Lots of things there about schools, about linking employment, about the air pollution from boats. So a mélange, I think. So can you pull out some of the key messages for us, please?
So we were talking about these.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Microphone. Yeah.
We were talking about these vulnerable and underprivileged communities, and that is really where the public sector has not helped very much indeed. They have been a failure in this area because these people are living in situations where employment is poor, health outcomes are poor, housing is poor. There's a high incidence of poor public health. There are stark inequalities in this area. And we must remember also that Marseille is a major port. And with deindustrialization, it's gone from one type of port that we all know very well to another one with cruise ships which are incredibly polluting. They consume large amounts of energy. They have to be plugged in all the time. They use sea diesel, which is extremely polluting, and all this affects the quality of air. Now, this, in a sense, is not entirely the city's responsibility. It should be a responsibility for the whole Mediterranean area, which is undergoing this particular problem. So back to our poorer communities, they have been, in a sense, cordoned off because there is no public transport that gets to them, so they have to use cars if they're going to go anywhere, and that in itself is very polluting. So more pollution added to the marine pollution. So what they're trying to do at city level is to open up public transport to these areas, to increase tram access to them. Marseille has joined the 100 decarbonising cities approach and will be meeting with people to talk about how this can be taken forward tomorrow. But returning to this issue of Marseille being a maritime city, the poor people in Marseille tend to live in the north, and the people in the north who do not have public transport cannot get to the sea. The children don't learn how to swim. They have no knowledge of the wide biodiversity of the marine areas. They have set up a project which involves shuttles that takes children from the poor north down to the sea. But as the Deputy Mayor was saying, this shouldn't be a one-off, once or twice. It should be an ongoing project for these children to be able to get and enjoy the marine environment. Also, there is a crying need for public policy to address environmental issues at city level, particularly through habilitating green spaces, rehabilitating schools, planting playgrounds with trees, introducing, as we've already said, swimming into the curriculum of these children. Because we've got to realise that ecology is not just a little bit of nature here or there, it permeates everything, which also explains the project they have to have urban agriculture and bring farms within the perimeter of the city.
Thanks a lot, Miranda. Well done. That was Herculean. Fantastic, brilliant bit of brain work. So thank you very much. Let's jump again to Prague. I think one of the striking things about Prague, I saw a Eurobarometer report a couple of weeks ago that said 2 people out of 3 in Prague think the national government is not doing enough. So there's a real frustration, it looks like, on a city level around something maybe people support but they can't really control. That's quite frustrating, I guess, as a politician. So what kinds of things are you doing to try and push that forward at the local level?
Well, thank you for that question. I have to admit that I'm one of those 2 out of 3 who think that the national government is actually not doing enough on climate. And although I hope that the upcoming new government, we had a recent election, will change the course in this regard. Prague is actually not waiting on the things to happen on the national level. On the contrary, we have decided to become a leader of a green transition in Czech Republic. And I believe that by putting in place our measures and projects outlined in our climate plan and prove their positive benefits, we could influence also other regions and also the government on the national level. Because as my colleague Gergely Karacsony, the mayor of Budapest, had said a few moments ago, there is no fight against climate change without the cities. And the problem is that it looks like that some of the key stakeholders who are not with us here in this room do not quite understand this point. So I would really like to see that the role of the cities will be acknowledged in the results of this summit, and I really hope it will happen, and we will see, because it is not a sure thing at this moment. So, because as I have said, Prague is committed and prepared, thanks to my deputy mayor, Peter, who was working on that day and night. So we had prepared in the year 2019 the climate pledge to reduce CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030 compared to the levels of 2010, and we want to reach the climate neutrality by 2050. And this year, the City Assembly had adopted the climate plan for Prague with 69 specific measures which will lead us towards fulfilling the pledge by 2030. And it's got 4 pillars. First one is the sustainable energy and buildings. Second one is a sustainable transport. Third is a circular economy. And the fourth pillar is a adaptation, that means focus on the greenery and public space and water elements in the city. My colleague here definitely could give you all the details, but I will focus now on the key elements to speed up the process. So what do you need to speed up the process on the level of the city? First of all, you need the public declaration of the commitment. Second, you need an expert support for the politicians and the city administration. Third, you need data-driven management and smart tools to support the transition. You need to have also a clear action plan with involvement of everyone. That means all parts of the city. Prague is a very fragmented city, by the way, and also all the citizens, as we have mentioned this before. And for this, you need sufficient participatory tools and PR support to get the public on board. So I believe that the big cities could really be pathfinders in countries who do not have a sufficient commitment for the climate agenda on the national level, because we have, as the cities, a huge potential to work on this. We are big greenhouse emitters at the first place, and on the second hand, we are economic, innovation and educational hubs. So I could end with one more quoting my colleague Gergely Karacsony: there is no fight against climate change without the cities. But I would steal a different quote from the former mayor of Denver, Wellington Webb, who said that the 19th century was the age of empires, the 20th century was the age of the national states, and according to the United Nations, 68% of the global population will live in the cities by 2050, which is, by the way, the year when we want to reach the carbon neutrality, I think that the 21st century is becoming the century of cities, and we need to make sure it will be a century of responsible and sustainable cities. And this is how we can help the world to make the real difference.
Thank you very much for that passionate and clear articulation. I'm going to give the last word on this panel discussion to you, Marvin. And we mentioned a bit about the health stuff, and there's a lot of conversation in this country about building back and building back better and learning from some of the good things which have happened during the terrible past 18 months we've had. I know that Bristol are really trying to embed the whole shift to climate neutrality within your COVID recovery plans. Can you maybe tell us a bit about how you're doing that and how those two things kind of come together?
Well, we've put decarbonisation and a just transition at the heart of our corporate strategy. We have a one city climate plan written by not just us as local government, but all the city's organisations, from private sector to universities to voluntary sector. But if this is the last word, we should talk about money, right?
Yeah. Talk about money. Yeah.
Look, we can all get together as mayors and tell each other stories about best practice, but it all costs money, and we're all going to say that's really good. How much did that cost? And apart from that, everything that you've been talking about, we talked about free transport, retrofitting homes, tackling poverty. We need money, and I wanted to say it's not funding, it's investment, because there's a return. Not just for the decarbonisation infrastructure itself, but to invest in our communities so that they are supported through the transition. Because the perversity of this whole thing on climate change is that the exploitation of the planet could not have happened without the exploitation of the most vulnerable people, right? So those two have gone together. Then it's the most vulnerable people who are going to get hit first and hardest by the consequences of climate change. Right? They're going to die, they're going to end up climate-driven migrants and all the rest of it. And on top of that, now, as we face the prospect of a major economic restructuring that we have to decarbonise the way our economies work, those same people will be most at risk on falling on the wrong side of that economic restructuring. Their jobs disappearing, their economic insecurity rising. And I think the political consequences of that are very high, that we'll have predatory politicians with easy outs, scapegoating, extremist views, preying on those people who feel like they're losing hope through this journey of decarbonisation. And the political consequences of that would be high. And we've tasted it. We've tasted it with Brexit-type politics in the UK. We've tasted it with Trump in the United States, and it's been in parts of Europe as well. To think the cost of decarbonising Bristol's economy is about £10 billion. We don't have £10 billion. So off the COP, I say around COP, there are a number of things that need to happen. They need to talk about real money, but they also have to talk about how cities will access that money.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the big dangers is they will start to talk about trillions of dollars, but they will not address the challenge that cities have in accessing that investment money. It gets clogged up in national government structures, or we don't have the capacity to access it, and it won't get spent, and we won't deliver. So the point you made there is no decarbonisation, there is no world success at a COP unless cities are delivering. Any announcement has to be attached to the how, and the how has to be attached to real places, mayors, right? It has to be attached to measurable outcomes set against specific dates and real finance, predictable long-term finance. If we don't hit each of those targets, COP will be less than it should have been and could have been.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks very much for that. And the whole purpose of the Mayors Alliance is obviously to bring, well done. You have to go, yeah. And in a nutshell, you've just symbolised what the Mayors Alliance is about. So we're bringing cities together to lobby for funds, to make sure the funds go to the right place, to make sure they're at the table. So thanks for finishing on that perfect note from our... Can we just join together and say thank you to our panellists, please, folks? Thanks a lot, guys. If you want to, you could go and dismantle your technology. I'm looking for Dan Laird. So is Dan with us? I think I saw him earlier on. So delighted. I think, in fact, we heard a great phrase from the mayor of Utrecht about bringing Paris home. Come and join us, please. And it's really great that you can join us. Dan, it's so nice to see you today. I'm going to ask you, I think you just say a few words about joining the dots and connecting the Paris Agreement with what's happening in Glasgow. And then when you're finished, I will invite Annalise on the stage to finish today's events. Do you want to come and speak from the lectern? Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to Eurocities for the invitation. Thanks for Glasgow for welcoming us. I am, as Deputy Mayor of Paris, I'm very honored to close this very high-level session and very happy to see so many mayors here at COP26. This shows our determination to play a more prominent part on the international scene. The stakes at COP26 are high: finance, adaptation, loss and damage, NDC. I strongly believe local governments have a key role to play. Our competencies on urban planning, transport, housing, greening take essential to implement concretely climate policies. Our direct link with communities, citizens, companies allow us to mobilize them and create the momentum needed for climate action. Sadly, subnational governments are not quoted in the UK cover paper, and it looks like the final COP26 decision will not recognize more our role. As the host city of COP31, during which the Paris Agreement was adopted, Paris has a special role in making the voice of cities and subnational governments heard in the global climate struggle. Last year, as a celebration for the Paris Agreement 5th anniversary, the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, gathered numerous mayors from around the world at the Zero Carbon Forum. 138 cities endorsed Paris Declaration. In this declaration, cities commit to put climate action at the center of all urban decisions, making so to achieve climate neutrality. It is also a pledge to encourage national states to issue new ambitious climate contributions consistent with the Paris Agreement and to confirm their commitment to mobilize climate finance for less advanced countries. As they are at the forefront of climate action, both for mitigating and adapting to climate change, cities, and especially from Global South, should be direct recipients for climate finance. In recent years, floods, droughts, heat waves, pollution peaks have proven to be a serious strain in our city. These events have clearly shown us that the climate emergency does not only concern future generations of faraway countries. We are already affected in Paris as all territories across the world. I was elected in the most popular district in the northeast of Paris, and I know how the poorest ones are the most affected by climate change effects and by energy poverty. Ecological transition must be socially fair. It's even an opportunity to reduce poverty by creating local jobs. No one in our cities must be left behind. Dear colleagues, let's keep on being at the forefront of climate action. I believe in our collective power to implement locally Paris Agreement. You can count on us. You can trust Paris and its mayor, Anne Hidalgo, to continue the struggle against climate change. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so thank you everyone. This afternoon, cities, a lot of them have already disappeared, but no problem. They have stated that climate action and social progress are two sides of the same coin, and that there cannot be an effective fight against climate change without a strong, strong, strong involvement of cities. Because you act. And because in the coming months and years, this is not going to be easy. In the coming years, we will need a lot of creativity, because the challenges we've heard about by all mayors, they are immense. We've heard mobility, we've heard air quality, we've heard energy poverty, financing the transition. And connected to that, we even heard about challenges in the field of national governments, right? So not only these challenges are immense, but they also need to be tackled in a different way, in a systematic way, in a systemic way, rather, as we've heard from Glasgow, for instance, but also in a co-creation and, in a partnership with local actors that we've heard, for instance, from Marseille and other mayors. So to cut the story short, we will need ambition, we will need innovation, and we will need action. Something like Ambinovaction. Can we do that? It sounds like Novak, so it's better not, but Ambinovaction. Just to make you understand the three elements that we will need. So cities do. They want to do, and they can do a lot to bring Paris home. Not Paris, but the Paris Agreement home. But they cannot do it alone. So we will need all actors of society and the economy, but also all the levels of government. So being here today is really important. Being here today together as cities across Europe, you all represent different realities, but at the same time you all share the idea that we must work harder and faster to reach climate neutrality by 2050 and the targets of the Paris Agreement. If you believe that, then the Mayors' Alliance for the Green Deal is the right place for you. So whoever is not on board yet should come on board. Final thing, last week we were in Leipzig for the annual conference of Eurocities, a big reunion after 2 years. 100 mayors got together to discuss about localizing the Green Deal, and they've prepared an SOS to the world, a message in a bottle, like the police song, and to bring to the negotiator in the blue zone. So maybe we could sing all together, message in a bottle, just to break the ice, come on. It's so formal here. Anyway, so on behalf of all those mayors, I would like to give this message in the bottle to Paris, Dan, which I know you will go to the negotiator and to the blue zone, to the blue zone tomorrow. So you have this great responsibility. So I think the time is finished. Thank you for all of you for being here, participating. We've already had an applaud for the speakers. Thank you for the bottle messenger. Thank you to my staff, Masha and Alex, a big, really. Thank you to Glasgow and Eddie for moderating us, Glasgow for hosting us, and yeah, let's keep the battle going. Actually, the war going. Thank you very much.